The mistake that almost destroyed a historic building, and the decision that unexpectedly changed everything. That day, I realized there was no longer any way to run from what I'd done. It was early, the sun hadn't even fully risen yet, and I was already awake, my heart pounding and a strange sense of emptiness. It had been a few weeks since the accident, but it felt like time had stopped there. I could still hear the sound of the structure giving way, that dull thud that instantly chilled me. Since then, I'd slept poorly, waking up in the middle of the night with the sound echoing in my head. I knew it was my mistake, and the worst part was that no one needed to remind me. That day would be the meeting with the board, the inspectors, and everyone who had been affected. I knew it would be time to face the consequences, and part of me wanted to disappear, but the other part knew that running away would only make things worse. When I arrived at the company, the atmosphere was tense. People avoided meeting my gaze, and the few who did seemed to feel pity or anger, maybe both. I greeted the doorman, but didn't even hear what he said. I walked up the stairs slowly, feeling butterflies in my stomach I hadn't felt since my first day at work. I remembered walking in full of dreams, thinking I was building a solid career, and now I was the guy who had ruined it all with a careless oversight. The shame was almost physical, like a weight was weighing me down. I didn't know how to face anyone, not even myself. When I entered the meeting room, everyone was there. Carlos, the director with a serious and tired expression, Paula with a stack of reports in her hands, and Isabella, the inspector, who barely glanced at me, but I could feel the judgment in the air. I sat silently, trying to maintain my composure, but my leg was shaking under the table. Carlos began to speak, and his words hurt more than any scolding. He didn't raise his voice, but each sentence felt like a reminder of everything I had destroyed, not only the structure, but the trust of many people. I tried to listen, but part of my head kept repeating, "How could you be so stupid, Raphael?" And I had no answer, only shame. When he finished, Isabella began explaining the impact of the damage. She talked about its historical value, about the loss of the structure's originality, and I just wanted to disappear. That building was more than just a project. It was a piece of the city, of history, and I had been the idiot who tarnished it. Paula tried to soften the situation, saying that part of the restoration was already underway, but the truth is, the damage was already there, and it couldn't be erased. I remember looking at the table and wanting to cry. I had never felt so small, so powerless. The feeling of having let everyone down crushed me inside. When the meeting ended, no one stayed. They left one by one, and I was left sitting there alone, with a pile of papers scattered across my desk, and a head full of regrets. I stared into space for a long time, trying to understand how things had gotten this way. The truth is, I've always been impulsive, always in a rush, thinking I could fix everything later. But in that moment, I realized that later was over. Now was the time to face the consequences. And for the first time, I felt a genuine desire to change, to no longer be the guy who made the mistake. I left the room and went straight to the construction site. Each step I took felt heavier than the last. The building was silent, only the sound of distant tools filling the air. I looked at the damaged structure and felt a knot in my stomach. I could still see the damage I had caused, marks that wouldn't fade with time. I knelt down, touched the surface with my fingertips, and felt a tightness I couldn't explain. The guilt was so strong it felt like it would crush me. I tried to think of 1,000 excuses, but none made sense. I had been careless, impulsive, and that was it. That was it. There was no going back. It was at that moment, looking at it, that I realized I could no longer run from myself. I needed to face my mistake, take responsibility, and find a way to make amends, even if it was small. I stood there for a while, trying to gather my thoughts. With each passing minute, the feeling of fear mixed with shame grew. I thought, if I could go back in time, I would do everything differently. But I couldn't. All that remained was the present. and what I was going to do now. And then I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I needed to change, not for fear of punishment, but because I no longer wanted to live with this constant feeling of failure. Taking a deep breath, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt before. The mistake had shown me a side of myself I'd never wanted to admit, that I'd always acted too quickly without thinking about the consequences. Now, it was time to learn to act consciously. I returned to the company, still shaken, but with a strange sense of determination. I needed to talk to Carlos, needed to show him that I truly wanted to change. He welcomed me without surprise. I told him I knew I had disappointed everyone, that I didn't expect forgiveness, but I wanted a chance to rebuild my path. He was silent for a few seconds, and then said something I'll never forget. "It's not about the mistake, Raphael. It's about how you react to it." That hit me like a jolt of electricity. For the first time, I felt like I could make something right from the chaos I had caused. In the following days, I dedicated myself like never before. I arrived early, stayed late, and reviewed every detail I could. I learned to listen more, to ask more questions, to slow down before acting. Paula noticed my effort and began teaching me things I'd previously ignored. Each task I completed, however small, gave me a sense of control and reconstruction. I still felt guilt, still shame, but a new strength was emerging within me. The desire to truly be better, not for anyone, but for myself. One day, Anna, who had witnessed my mistake, approached me. She said she saw my dedication and was surprised by my attitude. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: recognition. It wasn't applause, nor immediate forgiveness, but it was the first time someone looked at me and saw that I was trying. That gave me the strength to keep going. The guilt was still there, but now it had a purpose. It no longer paralyzed me. It reminded me of what I needed to do to avoid repeating the same mistakes. Over time, the company began to reorganize after the accident, and I realized I needed to do more than just repair the physical structure. I had to be involved in every process, attending reports, meetings, and inspections. At first it was difficult. Each task felt like a reminder of my mistake, but I learned to use it as motivation. I wanted to prove to myself that I could be responsible, that I could do the right thing. Lucas, the project manager, invited me to accompany Isabella, the inspector who had been strictest with me, on a technical visit. I was nervous, but I accepted. During the inspection, she observed me closely, and for the first time said it was good to see my commitment. That wasn't an easy compliment, but it was enough to make me feel like I was on the right track. For the first time, I felt that effort could transform my image and my self-esteem. I started writing down everything, every detail, every step of the process. Paula began guiding me, pointing out points I'd always overlooked. Each day was a battle against my old impulsiveness, against the desire to rush and fail again. I needed to learn to slow down, to think, to be aware of the impact of my actions. Each completed task was a small victory, a reminder that I could change. Sometimes I felt exhausted, but the exhaustion was accompanied by something new, a quiet pride in finally trying. I was no longer running away from the problem. I was facing it. One afternoon, Carlos called me in for a chat. He said that some of the company's penalties had been reduced thanks to the team's efforts, and that my commitment had been crucial. I was speechless. He wasn't giving me empty praise. He was recognizing real effort. It touched me deeply. I realized I was regaining something more valuable than any project: my own respect. It wasn't just about repairing what I had destroyed, but about becoming a better person, someone who can take responsibility and act to improve. At night, at home, I sat alone, reflecting on who I was before and who I was becoming. Before, I'd acted automatically, impulsively, thinking I could always get away with it. Now I felt every action, every choice, with the weight it deserved. I learned that it's not enough to acknowledge a mistake. You have to turn it into action, into concrete change. Taking a deep breath, I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that I was trying, fear that any slip-up could bring me down again. But for the first time, that fear was healthy. It reminded me that attention and care are indispensable. When I finally saw the restored part of the building, I felt an unexpected impact. Looking at the building which had suffered so much and realizing it had been restored brought tears to my eyes. They weren't tears of superficial happiness, but of profound relief. I had helped rebuild something I had destroyed. It was the first real sense of redemption I had ever felt. There, I realized that the mistake had been a turning point, painful but necessary. I was no longer the Raphael who only knew how to make mistakes. I was becoming someone capable of facing the consequences and growing from them. After that day, my attitude within the company changed completely. I started arriving earlier, leaving later, and paying attention to every detail I'd previously ignored. I realized that responsibility isn't just about completing tasks, it's about being aware of the impact of what you do. I started helping my colleagues, sharing what I'd learned, and teaching them what I could so they wouldn't make the same mistakes. Before, I was afraid of appearing weak if I asked for help or admitted I didn't know something. Now I understood that admitting my limits and learning from others was a sign of strength. This transformation process was exhausting but necessary. Each day was a challenge, a battle against my old habits, but also an opportunity to rebuild myself. At home, I also began to notice changes. I was no longer letting work dominate my emotional life, but I was taking what I learned with me. I began to reflect on my actions, on how much my impulsiveness affected not only my career, but also my personal life. I learned to breathe before acting, to consider the consequences, and to handle pressure without freaking out. Before, any difficulty would make me act quickly and incorrectly. Now, I could breathe, think, and make decisions clearly. I felt that for the first time in a long time, I had control over my actions and my future. One afternoon, I ran into Miguel, a former construction manager outside of work. He congratulated me on my rebuilding efforts and said something that resonated deeply with me. To err is human, but to face it and change is for the few. That echoed in my head. He was right. I could have chosen the easy way out, disappear, run away, blame others. But I didn't. I faced it head on and transformed the pain and guilt into fuel for growth. For the first time, I felt proud of myself without needing anyone's approval, just knowing I was trying to be a better person. In the following months, we finally had the reopening of the restored structure. It was a low-key event, but for me it carried enormous weight. Seeing the building standing, intact, with every detail restored, brought me a mixture of relief and pride. I knew I couldn't erase the past, but I could contribute to the present and the future. Looking at that work and realizing my efforts had made a difference gave me the feeling that I hadn't lost everything. I still carried the guilt, but now it was accompanied by responsibility, learning, and the strength to carry on. Today, my relationship with the company and my colleagues has completely changed. I'm no longer the same Raphael who made mistakes without thinking. I've started to listen more, act carefully, and value the work of everyone around me. Each project I take on now carries a different weight, an awareness I didn't have before. And this makes me feel more alive, more present, more capable of dealing with challenges without repeating the same mistakes. I've learned that overcoming challenges isn't about erasing the past, but about facing it and growing from it. My name is Raphael, I'm 32 years old, and I still carry the memory of that day as a permanent mark on my life. The guilt hasn't gone away, nor will it ever completely, but I've learned to deal with it in a way that strengthens me. Before, I only saw the mistake, only felt shame and fear. Now I see the learning, I see how much it transformed me. Every time I pass by the restored building, I feel a quiet sense of pride. It's not pride in myself, but in the transformation I was able to make within myself. I still make mistakes, of course, but I've learned to acknowledge them, face them, and correct them without hiding. That's the difference. At work, my attitude changed completely. I became more attentive, more planning, more questioning, and more seeking help when needed. I learned to listen and value the experiences of others. Paula, Anna, Lucas, they all realized I'm not the same Raphael anymore. I gained respect, not because anyone forgave me, but because I regained myself. And that's a priceless feeling. Every day is an opportunity to keep learning, to keep showing that it's possible to grow even after a serious mistake, even after disappointing people who trusted you. Overcoming came slowly, painfully, but truly. I had to face my own limits, my impulsiveness, my lack of attention, and accept that every consequence of my mistake was my responsibility. I cried, screamed, lost sleep, and felt fear and shame like never before. But I also felt strength, clarity, and hope. I discovered that it's possible to rebuild not only physical structures, but also life itself, step by step, with dedication and awareness. I learned that change depends on attitude, on the courage to face one's own pain and transform it into learning. Today, I still think about that day, that meeting, and that construction project. I remember the sound of the structure collapsing, the tension on Carlos's face, Isabella's judgmental look. But I no longer feel paralyzed. I feel motivated. I feel the desire to keep improving, to not let impulsiveness dominate me again. I feel grateful for having been given a second chance, not from the company, not from my colleagues, but from myself. I learned that true overcoming begins when you decide to own your mistake, face the pain, and take action to change. I know I'm still in process. There are still difficult days, heavy memories, and the fear of making another mistake. But today, I can say I've become more aware, more responsible, and more human. I've learned that making mistakes doesn't define who you are, but how you react to them does. And I've chosen to react with courage and learning. I know the journey continues, but I finally feel capable of walking it without destroying myself. This is my story, and perhaps if someone reads this, they'll find the courage to face their own mistakes and transform pain into growth.